right, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Andrea Miller, Executive Director of CAUSA, and speaking with me today is Reverend Joseph Santos-Lyons with the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, or APANO, and Nikige Harmon Johnson, CEO and President of the Urban League in Portland. And today we're coming together as a coalition of 32 communities of color, immigrant rights, and racial justice organizations to release a very exciting report. It's called Facing Race, the 2015 Oregon Racial Equity Legislative Report. And this is the third multi-issue analysis and focused on 4 issue areas: civil rights and criminal justice, economic justice, education, and health. This report and our coalition recognizes Oregon's long and well-documented history of racism that is reflected also in public policy. And we recognize that these policies and over 150 years of practices in implementing these policies are a root cause of the persistent disparities Oregon's communities of color face. And we also acknowledge that the Oregon legislature and the governor have a big hand in ensuring that racial equity and racial inequities are addressed through public policies. And at the end of the day, our goal is allowing all Oregonians to thrive in our state. And this is especially important as we consider the changing demographics we have in Oregon. Right now, 1 in 5 Oregonians are people of color, and we're growing. So we thought it important to create a report so we could track the state's progress on achieving racial equity. And to do this, our report, Facing Race Oregon, selected 20 pieces of legislation from a number of bills that met our criteria. These 20 bills, 17 of which passed and were signed into law, are a bellwether on the progress that our state is making towards racial equity. These included 5 priority bills that we identified pre-session and discussed with legislators and leadership prior to the session. And I think it's really significant that 4 out of these 5 priority bills passed. And we want to recognize several key legislative and organizational champions, some of which are here with us today in the room. I'm going to list them. We had the Ending Profiling Bill with Speaker Tina Kotek, Representative Lou Frederick, and the Center for Intercultural Organizing. We had the Paid Sick Days Bill with Representative Jessica Vega-Peterson, Representative Alyssa Kinney-Geyer, CAUSA, and Family Forward Oregon, and a lot of other organizations. Fair Chance for All with Senator Jackie Winters and the Urban League of Portland. And the English Language Learners Reform with Representative Joe Gallegos and APANO and Latino Network. Our communities had an unprecedented level of presence and engagement in the 2015 session. And we showed up every day, just as legislators do, with our coalitions, talking to both Republicans and Democrats to ensure the needs of our communities are understood and that these policies are considered and passed so that we can improve the lives of all of our children and our economy in the state. And so our main takeaway is, we got a lot of good stuff passed, but let's build on that progress. And this short session and next long session is about building on this progress and tackling deeper and more comprehensively some of these issues that will advance and secure racial equity. And we'll talk about some of those missed opportunities in a second. So I would like to now invite Reverend Joseph Santos-Lyons to talk to us more about the details of the report.
Thank you, Andrea. And for the record, my name is Joseph Santos-Lyons. I'm the director at APANO, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. Good morning. So this is our third multi-issue analysis of legislation coming through Oregon, and we're pleased to see significant progress since our 2011 and 2013 reports. The 2015 report, which you can find a copy of, is a much more concise version that really highlights our key findings, recommendations, and provides an outline of the 20 bills that were analyzed in the report. There is an online version that has more in-depth summaries and a legislative voting record for all scored bills. One difference this year is that we did not issue legislative grades, in part because we really recognize that institutionalizing a commitment to racial equity takes time. And we wanted to keep the focus on larger progress and fuel the growing bipartisan conversation happening that Facing Race has inspired. Overall, we are pleased that more legislators and staff have an understanding of racial equity here at the Capitol, which we define as proactive policies that seek to eliminate racial disparities and advance equitable outcomes for all communities. Rank and file legislators on both sides of the aisle were more meaningfully engaged with communities of color this session, and an increasing number of Republican and Democratic legislators championed racial equity legislation. This session, 19 of 30 senators and 22 of 60 representatives were chief sponsors for legislation scored in Facing Race Oregon. Constituents from communities of color were engaged earlier and more often, testifying on bills, communicating with their electeds, and actively participating in the policy making. Bipartisan coalitions were more proactive in working with better data and involving impacted communities in the development of bills. The governor's office and legislative leadership increased engagement on budget matters and policy priorities, leading to one of the most productive sessions for racial equity in Oregon's history. We saw an increase in bolder, more comprehensive legislation that included funding investments, some with explicit focuses on racial disparities. So in short, 2015 was a record year for racial equity legislation. We identified 3 missed opportunities in our report. Number 1 is repealing the inclusionary zoning preemption, House Bill 2564, which passed the House but did not pass the Senate. And we have had that as a priority bill now for 2 sessions. Comprehensive Women's Health, Senate Bill 894, and Cover All Kids, House Bill 3517. And lastly, we also identified increasing the statewide minimum wage and lifting the preemption so local communities can pass higher minimum wage that reflects the cost of living to be a missed opportunity, although no bill was passed from either chamber. So in short, I'm going to pass the baton over to Nikenge to share a little bit more about the recommendations and provide some closing thoughts, and then we'll have time for questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all very much for joining us. I am Nikenge Harmon Johnson, the President and CEO of the Urban League of Portland, and I stand here today with my partners in this coalition, but also on behalf of the members of the Urban League of Portland and our staff, for whom this work is and has been very important. Today is a day of celebration. It's also a day for us to be thinking about ways to build upon our successes from 2015. As our state experiences shifts in population, as our communities endure displacement and struggle to make a living wage, and as Muslim Americans and Oregonians from Central America suffer from hateful attacks and attempts to criminalize their very presence in our state, we call upon our elected leaders to do 3 things: to ensure that successes of 2015 are felt in the lives of Oregonians, to take up legislation that would cover the missed opportunities that Joseph just referred to in his remarks. We also call upon our legislative leaders to examine how their actions, their votes, their proposals will affect communities of color all across the state. When this state was founded in 1859, black folks, like me, were constitutionally forbidden from living here. Prior to its statehood and throughout its history, indigenous nations like the Umpqua, Malala, and Shasta, nations comprised Oregon before white settlers ever arrived on this land. And we know those folks suffered displacement of their own to reservations and were systematically removed, displaced, and mistreated. And even today, we see that there are some who would like to ignore the history of those folks who were here long before all of us. Take a look at what's happening down in Malheur County. With that said, we're experiencing a dramatic shift in population in our state. We have finally topped 4 million people. We were stuck in the 3s there for a while, but we're finally over 4 million in population for our state. That makes us far smaller than Washington and California. But there are 800,000 people of color in our state. 800,000. That's too many folks for our legislative leaders to ignore. We all have a stake in changing our state for the better, and we can only do that if we come together and speak with a loud and unified voice. That's why you see all of us before you today. That's why there are so many coalition members that are taking part in this report. I'm going to talk about the recommendations briefly before we move on to questions, but I will suggest to those reporters that have joined us and others that are listening or watching today that you download the report. Visit facingraceoregon.org, facingraceoregon.org to download the report. For those of you who are here today, you can pick one up. So let's talk a little bit about the recommendations that we've put forth in this report that we're releasing today. First, increased elected representation of communities of color. Communities of color in Oregon, we make up 20% of the population. That's 800,000 folks, and Andrea referred to that as well in her remarks. Yet only 4% of our legislative leadership is made up of people of color. This deep disparity drives a lack of context and expertise in developing public policy, perpetuating systemic racism and unintended consequences. Our second recommendation is for stronger legislative leadership for racial equity. While there have been measurable increases in individual Republican and Democratic leaders sponsoring racial equity legislation, more engagement is needed. From legislative leadership, from the governor, from agency heads, really across the board, we need folks to step it up, to develop and vet policy and champion racial equity measures, and to budget for proper investments to support those measures. In particular, committee chairs, Ways and Means subcommittee co-chairs, and the governor's policy advisors, alongside the traditional majority and minority party leaders, are folks that we'd like to call upon to do more, not just in the short session, but in the session to follow. We encourage leadership to increase communications with communities of color, to give timely and constructive feedback, and lay the groundwork for bolder and long-term racial equity solutions. One of the ways to do that, this is a hint from me, is to hire people from communities of color. Our third recommendation, ensure full and effective implementation of laws. Progress in passing racial equity legislation needs to be paired with appropriate rules and capable executive management. We recommend increased oversight, including oversight from impacted communities, to see thorough and timely implementation, provide quality evaluation to make adjustments if necessary, and to really make sure that the proposals that are put forth by our governmental leaders will have the desired impact on the lives of people of color. Now, as we talk about these recommendations and the importance of this report, I think it's also worth saying that the things that make life better for people of color in Oregon also happen to help all of us, regardless of skin color or racial background. It just so happens that Andrea, Joseph, and others who lead community-based organizations that champion civil rights and social justice have the privilege of standing up for policies that will make life better for people of color, with the knowledge that they will also make life better for all Oregonians. So we invite you to read the report and to join with us as we seek progress for all of Oregon. Thank you very much for your time. Andrew, at this time, we'll take questions. Yeah. Okay. If there are any questions, please.
I can ask a very self-serving one. Is there an accessible version of this so I can have my screen reader read it to me?
That's a good question. Let me check with Aaron about that, and we'll get you an answer.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no questions, would anybody...
Dean Edwards with Democracy Watch News. I should have said that first. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Have there been any more advancements in getting the health care for the COFA population since last I heard from the communities?
Yes, the COFA Health Access Bill is going to come forward in the short session. There was a work group that was put together that brought together both Democratic and Republican legislators and community folks with DCBS, and they're going to propose a bill in the short session to cover about 1,000 low-wage COFA Pacific Islanders who are currently barred from Medicaid. And that's being sponsored by Dan Rayfield and Andy Olson.
Do you think it'll get pretty solid bipartisan support?
We believe so. We believe that this short session, it'll have about a $1.4 million budget impact, but we believe that there's support on both sides. It's really a budget question at this point, and sort of pending sort of the revenue and sort of the budget considerations, we do hope it will pass.
Yep, you have a question?
Yes, I have a follow-up to that. What distinctions are made between those people who are from the U.S. territories, CNMI, Guam, and American Samoa, for instance, and those who are from the Associated States of Marshall Islands, Palau, and Micronesia, or a free association with the United States, and those from other Pacific islands.
I think the two main distinctions that we've been looking at is, first, everyone comes here and they experience being either an immigrant or also a refugee to this country, and they face some of the barriers that come with that identity. But folks who are from Marshall Islands, Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia are covered by a special compact of free association, or COFA, and that creates additional barriers for those folks, because unlike legal permanent residents who come here who face what's called the 5-year bar to public benefits, COFA residents face a lifetime ban to all public benefits, and that's an issue that is becoming more serious here in Oregon as these populations are growing.
Other questions? Would any of our elected leaders like to make a comment?
Sure. Happy to. Hello, my name is Joe Gallegos. I am the House District Representative from House District 30, which is Hillsborough area. I just want to say, I really just want to repeat my legislative mantra, which is we need to have an educated and healthy workforce in order for our communities to thrive. And it really does echo then the comment that was made earlier that it is really in every Oregonian's self-interest that we raise these communities in order to reduce the educational disparities, and also, I would say, cover all children is also part of this, making sure that all of our children are healthy and so that they can be productive workers and continue to aid the economy and develop programs. That's what, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Unless there's any other questions, with that, we will wrap it up, and feel free to talk to any of the three of us as spokespeople of the report card. Thank you very much.